talk about the temple. And every one of us can get something out of this. Now, we're going to go over the basics of the temple, but what we're going to go over should open up a treasure trove for you to dig into later on. And I like to say explore, because that's what we're doing. We're digging for things out of His Word to help us and to help everyone around us. Now, the basic understanding of the temple, the tent tabernacle, as it started, there's 3 sections, and I've outlined this right here in red. This whole area there, the red area included, inside the red is where the priest, only the priest could go and work and function. The areas that we're all most familiar with, the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, the holy place, where the 3 pieces of furniture were. Let's see if I can move it away so it doesn't all the time. Okay. Well, that's what we're going to, a little bit about what we're going to do, and then if it's not enough, you tell me. Yeah, we're going to kind of explain it a little bit about how all this got started. But the 3 main portions are 3 areas. There was a room here, the most holy place, or is most often called the Holy of Holies, which had the Ark of the Covenant in it with the 10 Commandments. This room here, and that's all that was in there now, besides 2 big giant cherubs. This room right here had 3 pieces of furniture. It had the table of incense, where the incense was burned to the Lord. It had the golden menorah, the 7-branch candlestick that was burned for the Lord every day. And then on this side over here, it had what was called the table of showbread, which had 12 loaves of bread on it, as the Lord instructed, 1 loaf for every tribe of Israel. And there's so much to learn in all of that. But like I said, we're doing the basics, okay? And then this area out here is called the inner court. And what was in the inner court was the altar of sacrifice, where the animals were sacrificed. And let me tell this too, because you young people, you're going to love this. Going up to the altar that was in the wilderness, when they wandered in the wilderness those 40 years, was relatively small because they had to move it. Every time they moved, they had to pick that thing up and transport it. But it had when they got to Jerusalem, they made it ginormous, and it had a ramp going up to it. Not stairs going up to this huge altar, but a ramp like this. Y'all seen movies, Jesus movies, right? They all wore the long dresses, the guys, right? Priests had long garments on. The reason they did not do steps, if I had on a long dress, anybody got a long skirt on? Nope. Okay. When they do this, you would see ankle on the other foot. It would pull it up. So they had a ramp so that no part was seen, didn't show the ankles. Totally covered with holiness. That's pretty cool. So the altar of sacrifice, and then this right here was a copper laver. And what that is, it was a giant pot, and later on we'll talk about how many gallons that thing held, but it was a giant pot, and what that was used for, when they were in the wilderness, they were out in the desert. They didn't have a place to totally submerge like we do for baptism. They had this right here. The priest, according to God's law in the beginning, was to wash their hands and their feet, to purify them, water purification, before they did work for Him. So inside this area is just for priests. Nobody else could go. If you were not of the tribe of Levi, you did not cross the boundary into the work area, into the area where God's presence was. How wild is that? We're not used to that, right? Okay, this is what it looked like when they were in the wilderness. It was a tent tabernacle. Those 2 rooms were in there. There is your altar of sacrifice. It's not really big. Ronald and I actually had the privilege of going to this replica that is built where the original one was. And this right here they have is the copper laver holding the water, very small area. So the inner court is there, all right? Now, here's the thing. Remind yourself that when this layout was given, God gave this blueprint right here to Moses when they got to Mount Sinai after they left Egypt. Okay? God gave Moses the blueprint. They all got busy and built this right here. And this was moved. Can you imagine packing and unpacking this every time they had to move for 40 years in the wilderness? Oh my goodness. That was a job. That's why, one reason why God commanded one tribe, Levi, that's your job. This is what you're doing. You're not going to be a carpenter. You're not going to be anything else. If you're a carpenter, you're a carpenter for this. No other job. You're not going to go out and be anything else except work for the Lord. Okay? And we're going to learn more about that in a minute. Now, here's the deal. This layout was given to Moses when the Jews first got to Mount Sinai. When they committed to God, when God said he's going to bring a covenant, I want you to be my people and I'm going to be your God. And they said, yes, we will be your people and you will be our God. They totally committed to the Lord. When they did, God gave this blueprint. I'm going to give you a house. I'm going to give you a house, a structure, not where you're going to dwell, but where my presence is going to dwell. Okay? Now, let me say it again. The covenant with God brought about God giving detailed blueprints for the tent tabernacle and all the rules and instructions for how to use it. Now, if you aren't aware of it, there are some very eye-opening scriptures about the tabernacle. Let's look at a few. In Revelation, which we know is the end, right? Revelation chapter 11, verse 19, it says, then in heaven, everybody say in heaven. Heaven. In heaven, the temple of God was open, and the ark of his covenant could be seen inside the temple. What? All right. Chapter 8, verse 3. Then another angel with a gold incense burner came and stood at the altar, and a great amount of incense was given to him to mix with the prayers of God's people as an offering on the gold altar before the throne. So in heaven, there's incense being burned. There's an altar there, just like the one at the temple. And then in the book of Hebrews, chapter 9, get this. Chapter 9, verse 11 and 12, Paul said, so Christ has now become the high priest over all the good things that have come. He has entered the greater, more perfect tabernacle or temple in heaven, which was not made by human hands and is not part of this created world. With his own blood, not the blood of goats and calves, he has entered the most holy place once for all time and secured our redemption forever. Wow. So, by these three verses right here, three passages, we can clearly see there is a functioning temple in heaven, just like the blueprint that God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai. So wrap your head now around Jesus telling the disciples how to pray. Remember part of what he said when they said, teach us to pray. You know, our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Oh my goodness. Now think about that. On earth, Jesus said, this is how you pray, that everything, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And the first thing God did when he came into covenant with his people, when they first became his people, we will be your people and you will be our God. The first thing he does is give them a blueprint of the temple that is in heaven so they could worship him here on earth just like what is going on up there. That's pretty cool. I mean, really, that's pretty cool. Now, God had, we know, a huge plan for his temple and all that would happen, but what is taking place with that tent tabernacle, that first layout of blueprints, is like phase 1 of what he had planned, okay? Well, the tent tabernacle itself represented the presence of God. Just on the surface, it represented the presence. Because when it was out in the wilderness, you can see all the tents, all the tribes camped around. God's presence would show up. Remember, nobody could go in there but the Levites. But God's presence would show up. The glory would show up in such a way that everybody could see. Everybody could feel it. Everybody knew when God was in the house. When God showed up, you know? Now, let's see. Oh, yeah. Y'all know the more you study, the deeper it gets. The Bible's like an onion. You know, the more you learn, you can just peel more and more and more off. Every time you read a scripture, you learn something new. You get something more out of a Bible story. I repeatedly heard that and even said it myself. Well, God's presence being on the tent tabernacle right there, during the years that the tent tabernacle was used in the wilderness for over 40 years, and then once they got into the promised land, they were still using the tent tabernacle for 450 years, I want to say. Something like that. I should have looked that up, but it's over 400 years. Anyway, during the time they were using the tent, they were learning, really learning God's laws and his commandments. There were 613 total laws. We know the 10 commandments, but with all the laws that God laid out, there's 613. So this whole time they've been learning about the laws and the commandments. They're learning who God really is to them, what it means to serve God, to be his people, for him to be their God. They're learning all of that. But all through those like 500 years, 400 and something years, the nations around are kind of learning about God too, the God they serve. Whoa, he shows up and he shows out on their behalf whenever we attack. You know, they were really kind of learning a lot about the God that they serve. Now, their relationship, like I said, for those years were mostly about rules, discipline, getting rid of unbelief, and, you know, just surrendering all to him, learning to trust him no matter what the circumstances were. And almost 500 years later, from the time they built that tabernacle, David became king. And we all know when David becomes king, David adds worshiping God with music and song. They didn't sing in this one. There was no music here for almost 500 years. That's a long time. We can't imagine a service without it now, can we? No, y'all are awesome. The worship is awesome. It's like, how can you miss this? But they're just learning. And God didn't say you had to do it, you know. And David says, we're going to do it. We've got to do it, you know. I want to do it. So anyway, let's see. Okay, yeah, I know what I want to say. Really get this in your spirit, okay? It all began with them learning his ways and the discipline part and learning to trust him. And that right there, for that many years, just learning to trust him, learning what he's all about, learning the scripture, learning all the commandments, learning everything that God has told them to do, and just learning to be obedient when he says move, learning to be obedient when he says don't move, learning to be obedient when he says keep your mouth shut, learning to be obedient when he says, hey, you need to go talk to them. Okay? This is what they were learning. And after this period of time, when David came on the scene, David's like, okay, this right here, our lives are so blessed. We are happy, we're functioning, our enemies are at bay, nobody can stand against us, serving God is awesome. We can't just go by the rules, we have got to worship Him with singing and music, and David instituted it every day. It's got to be done every day at the tent tabernacle. Every day. And it's not just we're going to sing, what we're going to do is we're celebrating our joy at being His kids. We're going to celebrate His goodness. We're going to celebrate He's the best God ever. There is no other God. His faithful love endures forever. We're going to celebrate. We can't have it any better than this God right here.
Amen. Hallelujah. Yeah.
I'm telling you, every day we are going to celebrate His faithfulness. Every day. God never commanded the joy. He never commanded it. It's a gift to Him. Our joy, our celebrating, our singing from the heart to Him is a gift to Him. And it was done every day. Even on your worst day. See, we do it when we come to the house, but it was done, it was instituted. David, the guy who was the apple of God's eye, who had a heart after God, Scripture says. He had a heart. I'm not just going to sing. Everybody, I'm telling you, we're going to sing every day about the goodness of God. Every day we're going to do it. He's given us a song in our heart. We need to worship every day. Sing to Him. Not just pray. It's a house of prayer, but not just pray every day. Sing about His goodness and His faithfulness. Sing on your worst days. Sing on your worst days. We know we're supposed to pray every day. Sing on your worst days, on your best days, and on your worst days. We know what happened. Paul and Silas, best story in Scripture, of this example. Paul and Silas are locked up in prison, and at midnight it says they prayed and then they sang. And when they sang, a shaking started going on. An earthquake hit, and all the prisoners were loose. Every jail door was open, and every shackle fell off. And Ronald and I have been to the prison in Rome. How they what do you want to call it? Shackled you. How they pinned you to the wall. We've been to the one in Israel, right there in Jerusalem, where it's believed, they believe Jesus was kept there, but if He wasn't, kept there overnight. We know that Jeremiah was, and we have seen the holes in the wall where they shackled them to the wall, and at the lower part where they would shackle them to the wall. Everybody's came off, not just the believers. Oh, my. Let me say it again. Not just the believers. Everybody in their hearing, everybody around them was set free. Come on. We want our families saved. We want our school system saved. We want our workplace saved. We want, our community saved, right? We want to be able to do it out there, not just in here. That's what we're called to do, right? Take it to the streets. And this is the end time revival. We're going to the highways and the byways, He said. You know what that is? That's praying. And yeah, we know how to pray for souls. We know how to pray for transformation. But do we know how to sing about the goodness of God? On our good days, on our bad days, it doesn't matter. My life might be a mess right now. I was sick day before yesterday, really bad, but I was singing of the goodness of God in my heart. And when I felt better, it was out loud. I did the best I could. But you have to sing, and your environment will shift. It's not what they did. It's not because they went and broke the bars down. They got the strength of Samson. No, as they sang, God did it. God set the captives around them free. The environment was changed. Oh, my, people. Woo! They were living life, talking about Paul and Silas, away from the temple. Not just at the house, but away from the house. And that's what we have to do as well. Right? Keep that in your mind as we go on. Now, after this, David institutes the worship and the singing, and it really, they're celebrating their goodness and everything. It was after this, David gets it in his heart that we got to build him a real house. I've got a palace here I'm building. Everybody else, Israel's flourishing. We're flourishing because of the blessings of God, and we're singing about his goodness and everything. And it says, God's in a tent and I'm in a palace. In my own words, this ain't right. And God, of course, he says, I never told you I need a house. I don't need this. But David's determined. He wants to do it so much. It's in his heart. You need to be honored. David just wanted to honor God in everything he did, with everything. New ideas, new ways, just trying to figure out new ways to honor God, just to make him more special. Okay? That's a word right there. Anyway, we know Scripture. The Lord had a prophet tell David, you're a man of war. Your job is war. There's so much blood on your hands. You cannot build a house to me, because even though you're okay and you're great and it's my commissioning to you, you can't do this because it's not going to look right to the rest of the world. You're going out and killing everybody, and then you're going to build me this temple, and they're going to think it's a temple, of war. And that's not what God wanted at all. So the Lord, in his goodness, he said, you're not going to do it. I can't let you do it. But I will let your son Solomon do it. He will build my house for me, a house of prayer, a house of peace. And God was so merciful to David, he gave David the blueprint. It would be way better than that tent tabernacle. It was going to be off the chart. But he gave David the blueprint and the commissioning that his son Solomon would build the temple. And when I said that it would be a house, not just of prayer, but a house of peace, because Jesus is the Prince of Peace, who we know is coming on the scene. And peace, really, when you have peace settled in you, everything else just melts away. You can face anything when peace is in you. And the Lord was saying, I'm making a house of peace, such peace that he instructed, when you build my temple, you have the blueprints, when you build it, I do not want one stone or anything cut or built on site. For those that have been to Israel, or you've even seen pictures when we did the teaching before, the stones are ginormous, they're huge, and God says, no, you're not going to cut them here. You're going to cut them somewhere else, chisel and make all the noise somewhere else, and then you're going to bring them here. Hey! Huh?
Why is that?
Because of the noise. The noise. He was making a house of peace, no chiseling, no work done on site. No chiseling, no loud noise done on site. How wild is that? So, right around the corner up under the walls of Jerusalem, this is the entrance on the other side of where the Temple Mount is. I meant to bring the poster. I'm sorry, I forgot. But anyway, I wanted you to see the size of the hole that is cut, and the walls of Jerusalem is up here. This is even down lower, like the foundation of the walls of Jerusalem. This is a hole going in there, and it's called Solomon's Mine. And once you walk through that door, that's what it looks like. This is up under the Temple Mount area. The back side, it's like outside the city walls on the back side. And then when you go on in there, that's me. And then you go through these crevices, and it just goes on and on and on. And you can see niches where they actually have stones cut out. But I can't even imagine doing that. I can't imagine doing that and then having to transport those giant stones, around for the temple. That's some work. They were like from here to here and about that tall square.
So that's like a tight fit for that little door they have. Do they have
Yeah, exactly. Tight fit. Yes, sir. That's probably why the size of the door. The size of the door was probably the size that the stones would be to carry out. We learned that in the old city Jerusalem, it's got really narrow passages, streets, what they call, and they're so narrow. I mean, they're like from here to here. I mean, it's very narrow. And it's like, oh my goodness, trying to get a car. That's why they all drive little bitty Mercedes, because they can fly through them streets, and you got to stand up against the wall like this so the car doesn't hit you, seriously. And it's like, why in the world, what is the deal with the skinny streets? And they're like, the streets were made the size of a donkey being able to carry packages like grains and stuff on the outside. The size of what a donkey carrying his load would be, that's how big they made the streets. So, good question about the door. No. Yeah, and we don't have time to go into that tonight about how they actually moved the stones. Crazy thing. Oh, I'll have to remember to bring a thing. Let me tell you one anyway about how they move the stones. Okay, so you have this rectangular shaped stone. They would make a round wooden wheel, solid wood round, okay? And then in the middle of that wheel, they would cut out the size of the stone and slide one on this end and one on the other end and then roll it. That's ingenious. That's ingenious. It would still take a lot to roll the thing, but, you would have to roll it uphill. Yeah, going up to the Temple Mount. Huh? No. No, the stone is long. They put a wheel on this side and a wheel on this side. So the stone almost looks like a shaft going between. But it's a giant, square, huge stone that weighs like a ton. Huh? Does that make sense? The workers, the Jews. Yeah. Yeah, that's some labor. And then the cranes, once the wall goes up, you got to have cranes to hoist that thing up. It's really cool how they did. They were ingenious. But, God knew what he was doing. He knew they could do it. Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so anyway, so you got Solomon's mine here and all the huge stones that are coming out of it. In 1 Chronicles, if you're taking notes, chapter 28, it tells us, you can read it for yourself, that God gave David the blueprint. In 1 Kings chapter 6 is the description of it. And we're going to go over a little bit of this without getting too deep, too detailed, okay? Into too much detail. Okay, we talked about the two rooms. The Holy of Holies right here was 30 feet wide, 30 feet deep, and 30 feet high. 3 stories. Yeah. A cube, a box, where the Ark of the Covenant was. This room, the holy, most holy place, was 30 feet wide and 30 feet high, 3 stories high, and then 60 feet long. This is a porch that is added on. That's a whole nother teaching and description there. This right here, on this it's called the treasure chambers. It is the complex, the court complex rooms. And in these rooms right here, they would hold things that were needed for work in the temple, such as you needed wood for the altar and whatever. You needed the oil, so you needed lots of oil, purified oil. You needed new garments to wear, all kinds of stuff. They stored all that stuff, all the holy stuff in that area right there, among other things. That court complex there was 150 feet by 75 feet. And let's see, the inner court, that's the next thing. Let's go on. Yeah, so you can see that structure that I was showing you that's around right there. The inner court area, this area right here, the size of it, oh, I don't even have that size. I'm sorry. Anyway, there's a structure of rooms around the outside on that as well. Now, remember, in this area, only the Levites. In this area here, the outer court area, the Jews could go. Nobody, if you weren't a non-Jew, you weren't allowed. This is Solomon's temple, okay? So if you weren't a Jew, you couldn't get in this, I said the inner court, that's the inner court, outer court, I'm sorry. Only a Jew could go in this area to worship. Isn't that crazy? How would you like to be having to stand outside?
Wait, only Moses got that blueprint?
Moses got the blueprint for the tent, and then for the stone structure, David got the blueprint for his son Solomon to build it.
Imagine having to remember that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he wrote it down. God was real good about letting him write it down, and God might have wrote it down for him, you know. The Ten Commandments were written by the finger of God, Scripture says. So very possible. I don't know. Question asked when we get there. Or maybe somebody knows. I don't know. Did you have a question?
Yes, I wanted to ask, how would they know ignorance?
How would they know?
Yeah.
Because Jews, they were all family.
Ah.
Yeah. And, which you'll learn in just a minute, but I'll go ahead and tell you, not on this one, but on the next one. If you weren't a Jew, God was very big on this. Anyway, you would die. Be struck dead.
So I guess
Don't cross the boundaries. Yeah.
if you didn't know your ancestry or where you were from, you're just flipping a coin, I guess.
Yeah. Well, even today, you know, the temple's not on the Temple Mount today, right? So religious Jews, when they go up there to visit it because they want to get as close to where the temple was as possible, they will walk. The Temple Mount's very big. They will walk on the outskirts around. They will not get close to where they think it was for fear of crossing a boundary, that boundary, and God striking them dead or whatever. Which the Lord wouldn't do that now. I mean, you know what I mean? That was the Old Testament set up. But anyways, just God set up some rules, and he meant for, you know, and it's not that he was being mean. It's all a picture of. It's all an example of what's to come. And so he's trying to keep these boundaries so that it's a visual aid, not just for believers today, which we use it as a visual aid. We're studying, and we're going to learn a whole bunch more. But see, the Jews on a whole aren't accepting Jesus. So for them, it's huge visual aid. When things really start winding up here toward the end, things will click. If they're studying this at all, any religious Jew looking toward this is going to go, "Woo!" You know what I'm saying? So, let's see. The outer court is for worship. Okay. Now this is really, really cool. With that being said, with what I've just showed you, with Solomon's temple right here, Sir Isaac Newton, all right, who was one of history's greatest scientists, who laid the groundwork for modern physics, astronomy, and math. I mean, he's genius, brilliant, right? He became obsessed with